Hello, good afternoon. Standing on protocol already established, my name is Malaika Brooks-Smith-Lowe, and I stand here with Richie Maitland, and we are co-founders of Groundation Grenada Action Collective, and we're presenting in collaboration with GrenChap. And what we propose is an expansion of the Bill of Rights to extend protections to vulnerable populations, including lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender.
Okay, audience, we've been asked in terms of our engagement to listen and be respectful to all that we hear. Give them a chance to be heard as they will give you a chance.
So, also in abbreviation known as LGBT people. Now, I acknowledge that this is a very difficult topic for some of us to talk about. It's very uncomfortable, but it's also the reality that we live in. So I encourage you to listen to what we have to say with an open heart as fellow Grenadian citizens. So, first of all, let me say that throughout the Caribbean, studies show that as a region, we do not stand for discrimination in general. So allow us to share with you some of the definitions and ideas that inform our proposal.
So in moving forward with our proposals, we think it's necessary to establish some very basic definitions of concepts that you will be hearing throughout our presentation. We can perhaps start with the definitions of prejudice and discrimination. Now, a prejudice refers to a negative attitude towards a particular group of people. And some features of prejudices usually include negative attitudes, negative feelings towards that group, and stereotype behaviors. So an example of a prejudice might be the negative and baseless notion that people with country accents, for instance, are less intelligent than people with town accents, which might translate into a teacher in our public school system favoring a child with a town accent more so than a child with a country accent. Discrimination refers to unfavorable treatment of people within a particular group of people. So in essence, discrimination refers to prejudice translated into action. And an example to expand on our earlier example might be a teacher, for instance, punishing children with country accents more so than they punish children with town accents for the very same offense. Now, it is important to bear in mind that discrimination often operates in structural ways, particularly where the prejudices which inform those forms of discrimination are shared by the majority of a particular population or are seen as inherent parts of our culture.
So, in terms of sexuality, you can kind of think of it like an oil down. It's layered the way that we all have different sexualities, right? And it is informed by our attractions, by our experiences, by our behavior, and the way that we conceive of ourselves. Two of the terms which we are particularly, which relate to LGBT people that we seek to be included in the anti-discrimination section are sexual orientation and gender identity. Now, sexual orientation is the preferred term used to refer to an individual's physical or emotional attraction to someone of the opposite sex or someone of the same sex. Gender identity, on the other hand, is distinct because it refers to a person's innate and deeply felt psychological identification as a man, woman, or other gender which may or may not correspond with the sex assigned to them at birth. So, another term, in terms of the LGBT, I think many of us are familiar more with the L, G, and B part, but T stands for transgender, which is an umbrella term that is used to describe people whose identity, their gender identity and expression isn't necessarily typical of those that are assigned to the sex that they were assigned to at birth. And just in terms of getting an idea of how many people in the world, in our communities here in Grenada, regionally and internationally, identify as part of the LGBT community, the figures show that it's 6 to 10% of our populations.
Now, why is it important? Why do we want constitutional protections for LGBT people? Well, simply because they are particularly vulnerable and they face particular forms of discrimination not faced by other people. So just to list a few of them. LGBT people face very serious amounts of violence as well as threats of violence, and this not only applies to LGBT people, but
I've been asked from the audience to ask everyone to be quiet, just as we have been during the other presentations and responses, so that this delegation's views can be clearly heard. Remember that this is a consultation for all citizens, and therefore we ask for your tolerance. We ask for you not to show any prejudices as we've been asked by our presenters. Just listen so that we can learn and understand what is actually happening in Grenada at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so I was saying that in relation to LGBT people primarily face a large amount of violence and threats of violence. And in the Grenadian context, it usually happens within familial settings. It's not the usual mob violence that you would see represented a lot in the media in Jamaica and so, but it's faced by LGBT people in Grenada. Nonetheless, LGBT people are also very much socially marginalized. They are squeezed out of communities, they are squeezed out of events, they are squeezed out of families often, and they are often denied the opportunity to contribute in meaningful ways towards nation building. LGBT people also face rank amounts of workplace discrimination, and that obtains in relation to being denied jobs, in relation to being denied promotions, and in relation to being harassed by employers and also by co-workers. Now, it might be important to note that St. Lucia, for instance, in 2012, in they amended their Employment Act in 2012 to extend protections, anti-discrimination protections for people on the basis of their sexual orientation, particularly because of this issue. So we're sort of lagging behind St. Lucia in that regard. LGBT people also face discrimination in relation to the provision of services, and in particular in relation to health-related services and protective-related services. So for instance, GrenShop and Groundation Grenada are well familiar with affidavits filed in a matter in 2013, and one of those things mentioned in the affidavit is the fact that, for instance, at a sensitivity training held with healthcare workers in Grenada, there were healthcare workers who actually said that they would not provide health-related services to LGBT people. Another thing noted in the affidavit was a report by a lesbian spouse in relation to domestic violence. When the police showed up and it became apparent that this concerned a lesbian couple, he simply refused to investigate the matter any further and actually threatened to arrest them. So these are issues that we think need addressing. Now, besides those issues, LGBT people are also discriminated against legislatively. They are discriminated against in relation to the law, and that obtains...
Yes, I'm being asked, and I am asking you now, please allow the presenters to complete their presentation. We're losing some time if they cannot complete their presentation. As I said before, this process is for all citizens of Grenada. It is an inclusive one. Please, let us have them complete this part of our session. Thank you again.
Thank you. So another thing I was noting is the fact that LGBT people also face legislative discrimination in relation to being denied domestic violence protection under the Domestic Violence Act, in relation to being denied estate benefits, and in relation to being denied the opportunity to have the kind of intimacies that they want. Now, in relation to this constitutional reform process, the current Bill of Rights in the Grenada Constitution actually sets out some grounds upon which discrimination is prohibited. Now, the grounds as asserted in the Grenada Constitution are currently very limited and only relate to, well, as I indicated, an exhaustive list. What we propose is an expansion of those grounds to include other historically and currently sociologically vulnerable groups, which include not only LGBT people, but also persons living with disabilities or different abilities, and persons who may be HIV positive.
Now, as human beings, if this moment is an example, we do not have the best track record of dealing with difference, and our ideas of what is different changes over time. The idea of constitutions in all countries where they exist is to make sure that all people, including those who do not represent majority views, are in fact protected, are in fact given an opportunity to have a life free of violence and a life that has equal opportunities. Now, yes, there exists this idea that sexualities outside of heterosexuality are something new or foreign. But many of us in this room have great-grandparents who had people in their families or in their village who they referred to as Zami or Makwame man. LGBT people are us. They are our brothers, they are our sisters, they are our children, they are our parents, they are our artists, our politicians, our healthcare providers, they are our leaders, our media personalities who have all been and continue to be integral parts of our society for time immemorial, and who often have to lead closeted lives. One argument against extending protections is the notion that Grenada is a Christian nation. While it is undeniable that the majority of Grenadians identify as Christian, Grenada as a political entity is a constitutional democracy which carries particular implications, including responsibilities to protect minorities such as those who practice non-Christian religions, such as LGBT people, for another example. And for instance, we don't use the argument we are a Christian nation to deny that Muslims, Hindus, and Rastas can affirm and practice their faith in Grenada. Even if we would like to conceive of ourselves as a Christian nation, the question then becomes, what kind of Christian nation do we want to be? Do we want to be the kind that embraces the philosophy of love thy neighbor as thyself, or do we want to be the kind of nation that casts the first stone?